Fantastic, so welcome back. Quick little bug we just had to fix there, just pull Gremlin out of the system, just grab it by the ears and throw him away. Devon, yes. I think Darryl's ready to join us.
Absolutely.
Should we stop talking and hand
I
over
think
to
so.
Darryl?
I think the entire country, the entire world is waiting to listen to Darryl.
100%. From myself, Rob, Darryl, welcome to EMCSA Day 1. Are you with us, sir?
I'm here. Hi, Rob. Hi, Devon.
Hi.
Fantastic. Nice to see you. Nice to see you again, sir.
Welcome.
So let's get stuck into it. I'm not initially going to get up there and answer Devon's question. Maybe we can handle those sort of towards the end of it.
Yeah, 100%.
My presentation isn't what we normally do in terms of the Eskom presentation on e-mobility and so on.
Fantastic.
We normally speak from a perspective of where Eskom's at and what we're doing in that space. This one is a little different.
Perfect. So Darryl, then let me and Devon get out your way and over to you and take us forward, sir.
Great, thanks. Let's just see if we can get that slide up and running. The first slide in the presentation pack. Great, there we go. So actually, I said I'm going to be talking on a slightly different topic today. One of the pieces of research that we've done, I work actually in the research department within Eskom. So while we've been focused on e-mobility and everything that's happening in that space, a big part of what we do is actually research and development. And as part of that, we've looked at the potential effects of electric vehicles on the transport economy in South Africa. Why should we have a look at that? Well, the question keeps coming up. We keep saying that electric vehicles are coming and so on, but what is the impact of that going to be on the economy as a whole, and more specifically on the transport sector? And so we have developed a model. Dr. Nalini Pillai, who is our systems dynamics expert in that department, developed a model that could give us some answers in terms of that. So, the presentation I'm doing today speaks mostly to that. But more direct Eskom-related questions, we can probably handle that towards the end. Thanks, if we can move on. On the second slide, I've just, the previous one to that one. I just put these vehicles up here. Now, what I've done in the past is I put up an interesting picture of an electric vehicle that's something along the lines of a sporty model or something extremely flashy and exciting on electric vehicles. But here I've shown the kind of vehicles that I believe will actually start making a real difference in South Africa. It talks to public transportation, the sort of panel van type of things, even buckies to an extent, those sort of vehicles, because we're very interested actually in how this thing's going to go forward in terms of fleet vehicles. Fleet vehicles, I think, are one way that we will get a big effect from electric vehicles. And we're starting to see a few vehicles trickle in, but they're mostly on for the individual user, and not really for those sort of applications. So we would really like to see it going forward that way. Eskom has been involved in this space for quite some time. Since the 90s, we've been doing some research. And then from about 2017, we started looking again at electric vehicles and what it means for Eskom, what it means for the country, and so on. So we've been doing quite a bit in that space for quite some time. But we would really like to see this thing move forward. And we've been quite involved with government, etc. And as I said earlier on, when we speak to those individuals, employment is a big factor that they have a look at when they set their targets and so on. If we can move on. So we set up we initially did a systems dynamics model to be able to determine what we thought the uptake would look like in South Africa. In the graphic that we have on the screen there, We initially predicted around 234,000 vehicles by 2040, which is a fairly low number actually relative to the higher figure that you see there, which is close to 3 million, which was the government target that was actually set, or the aspiration, maybe we should rather say, in the Paris agreement. So yeah, the numbers are a bit lower. We now, the last time we ran the model, we came out to more like 320,000 by 2040. But even with that, the initial uptake has not been, not even quite met up to the levels that we got out of our model for 2020. So some of that may have to do with the COVID effect and so on, that vehicle sales in general are somewhat depressed. But it's a slow process initially, and then at some point in the future, it picks up quite a bit. Yeah, so on the next slide, we will see that a picture of a systems dynamic model screen. So we have a number of inputs that we put into the screen. I'm just putting this up there just to show you how it sort of works. This is the actual employment model. And there's a number of factors that you see on there. Inputs, they look at components, assembly, retail, fuel cells, etc. Each of those buttons at the top, and each of those sections are populated in order to generate these models and to do some scenario planning with those models. On the then following screen, you'll actually see the complexity of these models. Everything has an effect on everything else. So I don't expect you to be able to see or pick up what all the detail of all that stuff is. I'm just showing you the level of complexity. And then if you introduce drivers and influencing factors into it, drivers such as local demand, pricing, production capacity, government support, etc., it just adds to the levels of complexity in the model. So this is quite a complex model that we've had a look at. You may be aware that that Anthony Dane has also done some modeling around economic impacts of EVs and so on. I think that's more on a macro level than what we've had a look at. We're specifically looking at the transport sector, so not in general terms. But what he even determined from the work that he did was that there's some winners and some losers in this thing. So we would love to paint the rosy picture that everything is going to be better in terms of employment and so on with electric vehicles. But the reality is some people will do well with it, and others will have to adjust and adapt in the process. So moving on. Yeah, if we look at South Africa's targets for electric vehicles, and we look at the automotive production development program, the government set some interesting targets in terms of the growth of the automotive sector. This is really something that they are driving, specifically from an employment perspective. They wanted to see much more an increase in local content and doubling of the automotive employment in the supply chain going forward. What I'm concerned about with this model is that it largely ignores the evolving international automotive market. It looks at what we currently do and tries to build on that. But really, I think we've heard from the previous speaker and from those in the sector in general, electric vehicles is honestly the way of the future. It's the way the market is moving. And so, although we have these wonderful targets in place, unless they are aligned to the way the market is moving, we might not be able to achieve those sort of targets. Yeah, thanks. On the next one. Yeah, and just as an example of how things could change, I just pulled up this table which looks at the components exported to the European market from South Africa, and you'll see that close on 68% of the exports in terms of value is done on the catalytic converters. So if we are putting a large portion of our hopes on component manufacturer exports, and catalytic converters don't form part of the picture with EVs, then yeah, it's a reason for concern for us. We need to be well aligned with the way the market is moving. Thanks. So if we look at the first one of the sectors that we kind of considered historically, in terms of assembly, you'll see that vehicle assembly went up around between 2004, 2007. And then, again, it sort of came down. And you might well ask, well, why should it come down? And part of this has to do with emerging global markets and our competitiveness in terms of cost-effective assembly and so on. So, we are just one player in a very big global market. And so we are really affected by the way other players, in fact, are moving in that market. Other things like automation also have a big effect on employment. So if we're looking at assembly, in a developed country, the effect can be 0.5% in terms of automation on assembly. If we're looking at emerging economies, it can be as big as 14%. So there's a major effect there, just from the automation side of things as well. So again, all sorts of factors that we need to be aware of if we're looking at employment. Yeah, thanks. If we can move on. Yeah, so we did some modeling around this, and we found, in fact, that if you do introduce electric vehicles, there would definitely be a drop in terms of employment in vehicle assembly. There's fewer components that go into it, etc. This picture is a little bit skewed by the fact that I didn't zero the axis on the y-axis. So it looks like you're almost halving your employment, but it's not actually. It's not as bad as halving the employment, but you certainly do lose employment if you go the EV route on the vehicle assembly side of things. But you would have, the other point that I wanted to make on this slide is that you would have already lost some in terms of automation. So going forward, you would need to adapt in order to maintain levels of employment. Thank you. The next one. Yeah, so, we're not the only ones that have to adapt to this market. This takes a picture of what's happening in Europe. And in Europe, they also see that if you have, well, they would see that there, even without electric vehicles, there would be a drop in terms of vehicle manufacturing going forward. And there would be a drop very specifically due to EVs in their market. However, what the second graph with the 68% shows you is if you do bring in EVs, but you don't manufacture them locally, that would be the effect on employment in vehicle manufacturing. If you start manufacturing those vehicles yourselves, if you went up to 10% of the EV sales in Europe were produced in Europe, your employment starts getting back up to decent levels. If you get up to 90% of the EVs produced in Europe are produced in Europe, then you get close to the 99%. Well, if you include batteries as well in it. And then they say if you get to 120% of EV sales in Europe, then it gets up to 108% of what the original employment would have been. So they then become a net exporter of electric vehicles in the market. So yeah, so they're also considering how the impact of EVs and how to maintain levels of employment through aggressively taking on the market and producing more electric vehicles within that space. Thanks. Yeah, so we again did some modeling on this, And we also found that electric vehicles would, there would be an impact on the component manufacture side of things specifically. It would drop with electric vehicles, but it would not be as much of a decrease if we were to look at hybrid electric vehicles. So that's certainly something to consider as well. Hybrid electric vehicles, the plug-in hybrids, might be favored in Eskom in South Africa to some extent due to the distances that we travel and so on. People often ask about, well, can my EV get me to Durban and so on? I think they're missing the point somewhat, but even in terms of vehicles that we use that are work-related vehicles or fleet vehicles and so on, if you're trying to cover larger distances and so on, then plug-in hybrids might be worth considering, and that would improve the impact or lessen the impact on the employment market. Thanks, Jeff. So then if we look in retail vehicles, we'll also see, actually I'm going to skip over this one. This just shows that the retail side of things has changed a little bit over time in South Africa. If we go on to the following slide, you'll see the results of our testing. If we have no electric vehicles, and in this case, we actually applied factors. We said, look, there would definitely be a drop in terms of the retail side of things, because there's a drop in general in terms of retail of vehicles. But if you were to apply some factors to this, like increasing the disposable income and having a look at accessibility to financing tools, etc., you could then actually improve the situation and make it look better in terms of the retail side of things. If we can move along, I'm going to try and go a little bit quicker because I'm probably running over time a little bit. So I might creep into the question time a little bit. On the maintenance and repair side of things, well, certainly maintenance has already started. I think what we're showing in this graph is maintenance has already decreased. The actual numbers employed in the maintenance and repair sectors has already decreased. It will decrease even further if we go to the next slide with electric vehicles. These vehicles require less maintenance and less repairs. And again, it varies depending on whether you're talking about hybrids or pure battery electric vehicles. But what I'd really like to say is that it requires a different kind of level of employment as well. So we need then, in this case, to be talking to reskilling people to be able to do the sort of training that is required, or to do the sort of repairs and maintenance that is required on electric vehicles. If we move along. On the fuel side of things, fuel retail, I'm just waiting for the slide to come up there. In terms of retail of fuel, that side of employment has actually gone up quite a bit. But surprisingly, if you actually look into the fuel side of things, a large amount of sales are done directly on fuel. But in terms of profitability, they make very low margins. So it's not a highly profitable sector. In fact, they make a lot more profits on the shops and so on that are associated with those fueling stations. So that is, although that's a big employment sector that will certainly be impacted by electric vehicles. If we move on to the next one, we'll see that the fact that it will have an impact more on convenience stores and so on. If you're at a charging point for a particular period of time, then there's an opportunity to look into convenience stores, etc., at charging points. So even though the fuel side will come down, there's a new, or maybe not new, but a growing market sector that you could actually exploit in terms of that. Thanks. Then, I mentioned earlier on, if we look at retraining employees, it's certainly an area that if we improve the skills of the workers in these various sectors, and this one is specifically looking at vehicle assembly, then you can make an improvement after the initial drop in moving over to electric vehicles. We can raise employment again and sort of a higher standard of employment, if you want to look at it that way, if we're using more skilled labor. Thanks. This is just an overview of the results that we got. I think we can skip that slide just in view of the time that we have. On the next one, I just wanted to bring it all back and say, there's a negative effect, a net negative effect on terms of employment on electric vehicles, why would we even want to go that way as a country? Well, if we look at our exports, and it might be difficult to see, but these exports are in millions. So actually, to Germany, it would be in the order of 57 billion rand in terms of exports to Germany on the automotive sector. That's massive, and that is into a market that is very, very interested in electric vehicles. All the vehicles coming out of there have got electric derivatives. And so those sort of markets, starting with Germany, United Kingdom, Japan is also there, United States, etc. All those markets are moving in that direction. If we don't follow along with those markets and we don't adapt, it's kind of a case of adapt or die. We really will end up losing out on these things. We'll be trying to adapt ourselves to an old technology. And so at some point, we're going to follow the route of the dinosaur, and that's more than just an opinion. We have to be very aware of changes in the market. And so finally, I just believe that all our strategies from a government perspective, all the way through with the various stakeholders, we need to be aware that the market is changing. There will be impacts on employment, but there will be bigger impacts on employment if we are entirely sidelined. Already other African countries have shown their support for the EV markets, and so they have got in ahead there with the OEMs, etc., and they're developing and manufacturing, in fact, in some other African countries already. South Africa is starting to slip a little bit behind the curve, so we don't have a lot of time to be able to strategically place ourselves correctly to take advantage of that and to move into that space very quickly. Thank you. That's I've run a little bit over. And it's been a bit of a death by PowerPoint presentation, and I apologize. But each of those graphs sort of get something to show on them. That's what the model was all about. So awesome. Thank you for that.
So Darryl, very interesting. I mean, talking about a lot of the macro impacts of EVs on the South African economy, a lot of the macro impact, a lot of the things that we may see coming, and I think really informative. I think Darryl, I think you can probably guess. We've got a flurry of questions for you. What I'm going to try and do is just try and condense a few of them. Yes. And I know Devon's got a couple. I've got a couple. Darryl, I'm going to fire with the first one, and I think you know what the first one's going to be. What does Eskom anticipate the effect on the grid to be with EVs coming? I mean, we're seeing other countries around the world saying there are no more ICE engines by 2030. Yeah. What is Eskom anticipating the impact to be on our already, very honestly, kind of unstable grid at the moment? What is Eskom? What are you anticipating the impact to be? Let's start there.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was waiting for that question. It always comes up. The impact is actually perhaps not as large as a person would think on the national grid. So if we went to that 234,000 vehicles that we were predicting by 2040, and we modeled what that would mean to the grid, It would only mean an increase in energy demand of 0.45% for the grid. If we changed out 50% of the cars to electric in South Africa, then it would be in the order of about 7% increase on the energy requirement from the grid, and only maybe 4.8% in terms of peak demand. So these are not massive numbers. They certainly, Eskom is looking at strengthening its grid, and it's having a look at increasing availability of energy and so on. So, if we changed out half the cars, it wouldn't be a train smash from that point of view. We would be able to handle it in the long term, and we've also got time to get there, because that wouldn't happen overnight. Where I see more of an issue is on a local distribution level. So in terms of on your reticulation system. So if you are already constrained in, I don't know, let's pick a suburb. Let's say Sandton is already constrained and they've already got problems with loading on their grid. If you introduce a whole lot of electric vehicles, it's certainly not going to make things better. And so you need to look at things like smart charging at the time that you charge, etc., in order to be able to get around those potential issues. You might want to also use public charging in an emergency situation, but they're not insurmountable problems.
Fantastic, Darryl. I think that's really interesting. So what you're saying is, even if we replace half of South Africa's fleet with EVs, we're only seeing at a relatively small percentage increase, and we're obviously, not everyone's going to plug their EV in all at once onto the grid. So I think that takes the Eskom question and maybe puts it in perspective to people to say, look, it is something that Eskom's working on. They are aware of it, the problem, but it's not that we're suddenly going to increase the electrical demand by 50, 60, 70% overnight. And I think that that's a really good perspective. Darryl, and I think that gives people a realistic view. We're not going to suddenly change half of our fleet over to electric overnight, and that allows Eskom some time to work on some solutions, and also allows for everyone else to do what they need to do. Devon, I know you've got a great question for Darryl now.
I've got a great question, but also to please follow up on the first question. Darryl, if we say that the increase on the grid goes from 7% to 30%, what will that mean to Eskom in terms of its ability to deliver?
If we went from 7% to
30%, extra load on the grid because of EVs.
Well, we wouldn't go to 30%. So what I pointed out was if you changed out 50% of the cars, you would go to 7% additional energy requirement. So you're never going to get to 30% additional energy requirement just from vehicles. That won't. If that did happen, that would be a problem for Eskom, and Eskom would have to look at generating solutions. But
absolutely.
What I'm saying is it's a much lower level, and those would be more from a transmission and distribution solutions rather than from generating solutions, because the amount is not so significant. Okay,
because that was the. I very recently read a survey out of the US, and that's what they predicted for their country. And so just in case it was to become a reality, that might be something that we have to deal with. But over and above that, my question for you is, does Eskom plan to roll out a charging station infrastructure in South Africa?
Yeah, good question. Look, we've had a look at that, and that is one of the first things. We actually did consider it. We did consider rolling out charging infrastructure, public charging and so on, in South Africa. It's just prohibitively expensive at the moment, and with not enough of a return as charging points at this point in time. So if we've got 2,000 electric vehicles in the country and we roll out charging infrastructure on a large scale, it will cost us a lot, and we will get very little back in terms of daily charging that is done on those charge points. So we see that evolving with the market, the OEMs together with the charging charge point manufacturers and so on. We've already seen that starting to happen in South Africa, that the rollout of that has started to happen on a relatively small scale, but significant. It's quite broadly spread across the country. But no, Eskom isn't going to go that route themselves.
Fantastic. And I think that helps answer a lot of questions.
Yes.
I think people maybe would have assumed that that's the route that Eskom's going. And I think it's great to hear, Darryl, basically what I'm hearing is that you're looking for public-private partnerships. You're going to partner with the guys who are bringing the infrastructure in, and you and Eskom is going to focus on ensuring generation and stable supply, if I'm hearing you correctly. Is that what I'm getting from you, Darryl?
Yeah, 100%, Rob. That is perfectly correct. Yeah. So we will remain focused on exactly what it is that we do, which is the production and selling of electricity. But we will stay in contact with the market and move with the market in terms of charging and so on as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I think an interesting question that I've got here. Maybe a lot of people who tuning in, they got the electric car. I mean, they're not going to plug their electric car into their little 15 amp plug, and they hear people talking a lot. What is better for people out there? And what should we as South Africa be looking for? DC versus AC charging. Someone asking you the question. Darryl saying, as Eskom, what is better, DC or AC charging, and which one do you see being the preferred charging process going forward?
Yeah, so we don't normally talk about DC or AC charging as opposing concepts. The one way you will typically just be charging on a lower level, and the other way you're talking about fast charging. So if we're talking about slow charging, you typically would have a slow charger at home, actually. And that's because you can leave your car to charge overnight, for instance. You can plug it in sometime in the evening, and overnight it will recharge, and in the morning you can use the vehicle again. So there's no real need for fast charging in those situations. On the DC charging, on the fast charging side of things, that would probably be more on public charging points and so on, when you are in fact maybe on a trip down to Durban or something like that, and you don't want to stop for any lengthy period of time and if you are stopping to have a brunch or something like that, you don't want it to be too slow. So there you are talking fast charging. Now, if we're talking fast charging, we're talking in electrical terms, a lot of current that's going on there. So you need to have a strong supply. You maybe even need to look at storage solutions in order to be able to provide that large amount of energy over a short period of time.
Yeah. Fantastic, Darryl. I think that's really interesting. I mean, I'm not an electrical engineer at all, so when someone says AC, DC, I just think, well, is my battery going to get full, and can I drive where I need to go? Like that's my priority. I represent a layman out there. I mean, I don't understand the difference. As long as my iPhone and my iPad's charged, I think life is good. So that's where I come from. So I think, Darryl, thank you very much. I mean, that's explained it to everyone. I mean, this is adapting stuff. So when people think of hurdles, the first hurdle they say is, oh, well, Eskom can't supply enough energy. And what Darryl's explained to us is that Eskom's working on it, and we have the time to make the solutions. And then we start talking about these other things that stop people from the change mentality. And I think, Darryl, that you explain these things, making it simple for us to understand, allows us to take that fear of change and say, well, actually, we don't have to be scared of it. And I think that's great. I think that's really insightful. So Devon, I know you've got a burning one that's just been sent through to us.
Yes,
fire away.
Big one. Darryl, in your opinion, what can our government do to encourage the uptake of EVs?
Yeah, look, that is really that's a big question, and I really think if they apply themselves, they would want to go that route for the reasons that I've given already today. But what can they do to do it? Well, the biggest thing that they can do is firstly look at the cost side of things. So at the moment, we've mentioned it a few times in other meetings, the import duties and taxes are very, very high. And so if we could bring those down, ideally we would love to have had incentives in place to push for electric vehicles, and a number of other countries, the US and various countries in the European Union, etc., have got subsidies and so on in place to just kickstart the process. We would love to have had that, but if we can't have that, at least bring down the import duties and taxes on electric vehicles so that they become more affordable. I see that the cost of vehicles being the biggest hurdle. It would also be nice if we could encourage different models. I pointed out to looking at buses and panel vans and all sorts of things, but even on the passenger vehicle side of things, if we could have smaller, cheaper options as well coming on into the country, it would certainly help.
Fantastic, Darryl.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point and a great answer to that really difficult question, because I think that's what everyone has to ask, and I think that's how are we going to get ahead of this curve? So I think maybe, Darryl, with heading towards the end of your session, I've got a good one here, and I think that this is something that people have been answered. Maybe you've touched on it a little bit. Let's be a little bit more direct about it. With the supply constraints that Eskom continues to experience currently, i.e. load shedding, are we ready for large-scale EV transition in South Africa? Are we ready for it? I mean, everyone's talking about it. Darryl, in the hot seat, are we ready for it in South Africa?
So you raised the interesting question of load shedding, and load shedding is certainly something that unfortunately has become somewhat of a reality in South Africa on a fairly regular basis. We are, the one great thing about South Africans is we are adaptable people and we're innovative people, and I think that even if we had a large number of electric vehicles in South Africa at the moment and there was load shedding, there are certainly ways around it. You could reschedule your charging for another time in the day. You could make use of public charging. Already, as I said, there is some public charging available. So there are definitely ways around it. And, we've seen people already getting, I hate to say it, but kind of used to load shedding in a sense that they know what they need to do and they get it done in spite of that. In spite of the load shedding, they still manage to get everything done on time and when they wanted to get done. I don't think, as I said earlier on, I don't think that's an insurmountable problem. I think, where South Africa can certainly go forward into that space without fear. I don't think it would be a huge problem for anybody if we were to go tomorrow into a fairly high or large scale, as you said, rollout of electric vehicles.
So if I'm hearing you correct, Darryl, and I'm going to put you on the spot here for a straight answer, is you are saying that we are ready for large scale EV transition in South Africa, that you believe we are ready, that we can overcome the challenges, but as a country we are ready. If I'm hearing you correctly, yes, no answer.
I don't think we're ready as a country, and one of the things I was trying to point out earlier on is that our entire model is built around the internal combustion engine and the vehicles that we produce related to that. So on the manufacturing side, we are behind in terms of that. On the importing side, if all the obstacles were removed and we could import a lot of these vehicles at a reasonable cost tomorrow, I think we could. Well, there'd be some changes. We'd have to adapt quickly, but I don't think it would be the end of the world.
Fantastic, but I think that's the South African way. We adapt quickly, we overcome. So, and I think that, Darryl, I'm gonna take a yes from that answer. I know you're being politically correct. You may be skirting around it a little bit, but I'm gonna take a yes. Devon, are you hearing a yes?
I'm hearing a yes, and I really wish you guys the best of luck, because I see a lot of EVs coming through very quickly.
Yeah,
we've got a very powerful automotive industry. There's lots of jobs at stake. The industry will cope. The industry will change.
100%.
So there's going to be big volume EV adoption, in my opinion.
Yep.
And we're going to be ready from an Eskom point of view, from a grid point of view. I also just want to know, would Eskom ever venture out on different forms of creating energy, just in case you can't cope in the current format?
Yes, so Eskom is already looking at that. They're already looking at various renewable forms of energy. We have got a committee looking at various green options, including hydrogen production, etc. So very much so, Eskom is definitely, we're already active in that space, and I expect it to increase our activity in terms of renewables and so on for energy supply. Our role in terms of that to increase significantly in the future.
Fantastic.
Oh, wonderful.
Well,
yeah.
I think that's great to hear, Darryl.
Yeah.
We've got 2 minutes left of your time, so I know you're a busy man and you've got a lot to do. So I'm going to hit you with one quick last question, and I'll ask you for a 1 minute answer here. And I think a lot of people think that when they see Europe, no more ICE engines from 2030. Are we too late in South Africa? Have we missed the proverbial electric bus? And if we haven't, where to from here? As Darryl Chapman, are we too late? And if we aren't, where to from here, sir?
I don't think we're too late. I think I would love us to have embraced it on a higher level, and everybody, all the different departments within government, all speaking the same language and moving forward with this thing. I certainly don't think we've entirely missed our opportunity. I think it's still there. It's still there for us to grasp and to position ourselves to develop but we have to talk more on practical terms rather than just on strategy and theory, and we have to actually have a plan and implement that plan if we want to take advantage of that market. If we're going to carry on talking about it, I don't think there's I think we're going to miss that proverbial bus, but act on it soon, it can happen.
Fantastic. So you're saying where to from here? Less talking, more action, so we don't get hit by the proverbial electric bus.
100%.
Fantastic. Well, Darryl, I know it's for you. I think it's a big thing to come and sit into these e-mobility conferences, because everyone always fires the same question at you. Everyone's always got the same kind of Eskom, and I think it's been a privilege. I mean,
yes,
we've had the opportunity for you to put forward your side of the tale, which I think is very important in dialogue, that we get both sides of the tale, because it's easy to get caught up in sensational media and sensationalist reporting and crisis management and everyone getting really excited. And I think what we've heard from you today is really important and given us a real clear picture of where it is, but also showing us that Eskom acknowledges the problem. Eskom's looking into renewables, Eskom's looking into other options, but also Eskom's being realistic about what's going to happen in South Africa. So for me, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable about what's going to happen with the EVs. Devon, your thoughts?
Exactly. What we're talking here is a 10-year plan, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So at least we're talking the talk right now, then the action can follow thereafter.
Sure.
We're building up to a stage. Our local OEMs are obviously, they're changing their production lines, they're changing their planning as well, but we're going to get to a stage in the next 10 years where this stuff's going to be a reality. We're going to need the grid, we're going to need the alternative energy sources, and therefore we need to be talking the right language to the right people. And that's exactly what we start today.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, from my side, Darryl, thank you very much for taking the time out on this Monday morning. We really appreciate you joining us. It's been great. You've answered a lot of questions. I think we could have had a lot more, but I appreciate you taking the time. So from all of us here in the EMCSA studio, thank you very much, Darryl, for taking your time out. And we'll chat to you more, I think, in the next couple of weeks and months. So for myself, Rob and Devon, Darryl, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's been my privilege and pleasure to chat to you guys. And thank you. We look forward to what the future holds in this space.
Fantastic. Darryl. So that's Darryl Chapman, the project manager for e-mobility at Eskom. I think, having a hot seat in this debate. Everyone's on him all the time. Load shedding, this, renewables, what's Eskom doing? And I think that, he has a lot of good answers. I think maybe a lot of people saying maybe not all the answers, but I don't think we can expect one person to have all the answers.
Yes.
What I'm really happy to hear is that Eskom is looking into all the answers and trying to find all the solutions, and they're acknowledging the problems that exist. We all know them, but they are looking to partnerships. They're looking to, more importantly, focus on what they do, which is supply a stable energy grid that we can then bring EVs into this country.
Yes.
Devon, your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. There's going to be a push from the manufacturer side and the sales and marketing guys. So they've got product that they need people to buy.
Sure.
But there also needs to be a pull. There has to be some reason, incentive for them to want to buy.
Yeah.
And therefore, Eskom and the grid and the stable energy supply will be crucial to that.
Yes.
No one's going to want to buy an EV if they can't charge. There's no infrastructure. So we're going to need to talk to Eskom a lot more going forward.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, that's been a great first morning here at EMCSA. We're going to break for a half-an-hour lunch, and when we come back, we've got Jaco Buerta, the CEO and co-founder of SolarF. He's going to be joining us at 10 to 12. So I'd like to ask everyone, go out there, grab a cup of coffee, have a quick bite to eat, and we will see you back in studio in half an hour.
Half an hour.
Done deal. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll chat to you soon.